Welcome to my studio. This is Sheila with Stamping Wishes, and I'm an independent Stampin' Up! Demonstrator. And today we're going to be creating this card. Isn't that just precious? Okay, so when I saw this paper come out with our celebration, I thought immediately of this storybook set. I just absolutely love the little mice and all the different stamps that you get with it. So let's go through quickly, and I'll show you the stamps and framelits that I used for this one, and we'll get started. Okay, so more than words I'm using because adulting is hard. On the framelits, I'm using this circle here to frame our little, because adulting is hard. We're using the Sweet Storybook. We used both of these along with this layering here. Then on our papers, we have used the Lovely Lipstick and Grapefruit Grove. Let me turn it around so it's not upside down to you. Foil sheets, I just absolutely love that. We use the Big Shot, which is our dot to dot, to form the little dots. I used Pear Pizzazz, did a little strip, and I cut out my strip, which was 3 3/4 by 3/4 inch, I believe. And then we're using the new DSP, which comes in our celebrations right now, Painted Seasons Design Series paper. Okay, so let's go just to kind of show you the stamp pads that I'm also using. Move some of these back over here. I'm going to be using the Crumb Cake, the Gray Granite, Poppy Parade, a little bit of Old Olive, along with the Pear Pizzazz when I'm sponging, and we're using Soft Suede and Balmy Blue. Okay, so here's our colors that we're going to be using. Now I went ahead so that we could just save some time today and get down to the nitty-gritty, because to me the card is made with the sponging, and that's important. So for the base card, I use thick Whisper White, and it's cut at 5 1/2 by 8 1/2 and scored at 4 1/4. Now you'll notice a little bit of tiny ridge here. My cardstock's the front cardstock is going to cover that, but I lined this up and went ahead and stamped it in our Stamparatus. Okay, and if you'll notice on the inside of this one, I did the same thing. I have When I Have a Friend as Amazing as You, Adulting is Easier. I wrote that in there. So what I did was bring this down a little bit, and then we'll trim this frame out. I got it a little bit longer than we need to, so I'll trim that before we lay that in. Okay, so I've gone ahead and stamped the mouse, and it's a 2-step stamping. I used the Soft Suede for the outline of the body, and then I used the Gray Granite to overlay. And I would definitely use my Stamparatus for this because it's so much easier. I had to coat a couple of times when I was stamping it. All right, and I've gone ahead with Poppy Parade and stamped the Because Adulting is Hard, and we'll punch that out shortly with our 1 3/8 inch circle punch. I've gone ahead and cut out the little circle from our set, which is the Stitched Label Framelit dies. Okay, our piece of white, this is the shimmery white that I'm using on all of the wording and the mouse because I think it colors better. This one's at 3 1/8 by 3 3/8. And then we have a background of the Poppy Parade out of a scrap that is 3 1/4 by 3 1/2. Then we have the DSP that's cut at 2 1/4 by 4 1/4. And this was that strip I told you is 3/4 inch wide, and it's 3 3/4 inch long, which will make the little cut in the bottom of this. And then the foil sheet is 2 3/8 by 5 1/2, so it'll cover the full length of the card. So let's set this aside for a second and go ahead. I saved time to stamp the other so that you could see how I do the mushroom 2-step stamping, which is very much like how you'll do the mice. Okay, so we're just going ahead and put this in here. You want to make sure you get it at the right width. I'm using the longer side of it on the top. Okay, and then we're going to lay our mushroom in, and I'm using Crumb Cake to do our mushroom. Let's bring it down to about right right there looks good. Okay. And we will be cutting our mice out instead of using the framelits this time, because I really want to get them as trimmed as closely as possible so that they don't show too much of the white since they're laying on top of the mushroom. Okay, so let's go ahead and get our soft suede here. And you want a good impression on this, so if you have to go a couple of times to do it, that's okay, because we are using our Stamparatus, which will allow us to do that, because I want a real nice, clear print off of this stamp. Okay. See, that's still a little too light, so we're going to go a little bit more with it. And the reason I'm using the crumb cake, because it reminds me of the mushroom colors that you can find in mushrooms, but it's also because we're going to be doing a little bit of shading with that crumb cake as well. I think we'll go one more time on this one outer side here, just to make sure I got a good imprint there. All right, that looks good. All right, so let's go ahead and clean this stamp off. Now what we're going to do is to lay the overlay of the mushroom with this piece here. So we want to line it up the best you can by using your print, if you can see where your little dots and stuff are, and line that up with it. And come down, and I am using Poppy Parade with this overlay just to kind of bring in the color from the DSP. So let's go ahead, we're going to mimic that. Okay, let's go ahead and if you notice I had a little bit of light here, I'm kind of doing this on purpose. I want to get some of my darker shade and then touch it up a little bit, because I kind of like the shading going on by doing that with your two-step stamping. So let's come in and we will come over a little bit here and put some of that down. We got the effects that I wanted to. Need a little bit more on that edge, and it's a little bit lighter than I want it to be right there. So let's go a little bit more on the edge. And what's nice about that is when you have your lighter edge, even if you go dark all over, it's still going to be a little lighter than the rest, and the other part will just darken up some, and that's a pretty effect that it gives on it. So perfect, it's exactly what I was looking for. So that's your stamping shading without having to use markers or anything else to accent or shade it. Okay, so let's go ahead and take this off and we will color. I'll spend most of my video time coloring, and I'll speed it up when we get to the cutting out of the mouse, because I don't think you need to watch me do that part of it. So let's go ahead and get started. I'm going to go ahead and come in with my first layer of the green, and I'm using Pear Pizzazz to do that. Let me make sure that I'm up where I need to be so you can see everything. Okay, so I've mentioned this in my other videos. I have converted to using these makeup brushes because it helps me to sponge in. I still use our spongers and our sponge daubers and the like, but it depends on the technique and what I'm using. On this one, I wanted a very soft background. I wanted it all just to kind of blend like a picture would. And so that's why I'm using the colors that we're using. And remember, you can always add more to it, so you don't want to get overzealous with adding too much color all at one time. Okay, so just like using your sponges with Stampin' Up, you want to go off the page and keep it going in a circular motion like so. And then we'll clean it off with our micro cloth here. And we'll bring in a little bit of the old olive now into it. And I'm wanting to stay down further down here because I'm going to be putting some of the crumb cake up into the mushroom area. So I'm just really kind of getting that in-depth color back behind here. And we're going to be using the balmy blue for the sky when we do that portion of it. So we'll be doing that shortly. And you can come into right at the grass, and we can use a little bit of a marker or a blender pen to go over that grass if we want to deepen that a little bit. Sure can. So let's go ahead and get our let's go ahead and layer just up. We'll go ahead and do our crumb cake. Okay, so with it, I'm going to go to a little bit smaller brush because we're dealing with a little smaller area. And just like with the green, we want to start it off here, and I'm wanting to put more of my deeper color over here on the left side, because to me that's the shading to kind of give you that depth that you need, and I'll bring in even a smaller item. Okay, so let's keep intensifying the color a little bit until we're happy with it. Okay, let's bring this down. Same thing with the stem. I want most of the crumb cake coming to the left side of it. Now I'm going to use my small brush here and really get down close to where I want it to be in the edges here. There. Okay. Same way here, we're going to just circle around and bring more color right up underneath this edge where we want it, and then let it get lighter as it goes down. And in all sponging, you don't want to have a heavy hand with it, whether you're using regular Stampin' Up sponges, or whether you're using the sponge daubers, or whether you're using makeup brushes like I'm using today. You need to keep a light hand because it's so much easier to add the depth you need a little at a time instead of putting on globs of color. And so often when you have a heavy hand, that's what happens to you. I've had some of the people on my team say that they don't like the way that happens, but it just takes practice to reduce that heavy hand effect that sometimes happens when you first start experimenting with coloring and sponging and the like. So keep that in mind as you do, and don't get too frustrated with it, because it will come with time, just if you don't have naturally a light hand. And fortunately I do. I have a very light hand stroke, so this portion was easy for me to learn several years ago when I first started stamping. It was one of my favorites. Anything that we were able to sponge or color or bring some depth or highlight to the edge of the card, I always got excited about. Okay, I think that's about what we want. We want just that subtle color of the sky in the background without getting it on top of our mushroom. So I think that looks good. Here you can see it up close. Okay, so let's go ahead and go to the next stage. And while we've got it out, let's do something I didn't do on the first one. I think it'll be fun on this one to do with both the mice and the mushroom, is use some of our Wink of Stella. Wink of Stella makes everything great. Okay, and that helps too. If you notice, I have to be careful not to go over my white because I really didn't want the white going in there, or the color going into the white there. So be careful as you're blending these colors, because it will help blend any of them that needs to be blended, and don't go outside your edges. Be sure you have wiped out the color off your brush before you go on to the next area. And I'm only going to do this in certain areas that I really kind of want some of the other colors coming into it. So there we go. I think that looks great. Okay, so let's go ahead and find our mice real quick. And those are the only other things that we need to do a little bit of coloring, and we're going to be using our blends for that. So let me bring out the colors that I used with it. Okay, so on the pink ears, I'm using, get around here, the Light Flirty Flamingo. I thought that was a pretty shade for the ears. And the nose is the areas that I wanted to go to. So we're going to go here. And remember what I told you, if you get outside the edge a little bit or inside, there's ways to real quickly finish that off. Let me get his nose here. Okay, so I'm going to take my marker and the gray granite and just go lightly around the edges where I think it needs to be to put more depth in. If I, feel like I needed the colors to come right to the edge, which I did in that area. And do the same thing around its little ear. And then on the edge of its tail here. And because you're working with a stamp and a marker, you'll get a little bit of a nice contrast in your colors, which I think really adds to it. And then we'll add there. So I think that looks good. And then for its paws and the other area, I went ahead and used the dark petal pink for it to give it, again, kind of a flesh but pinky tone as well, just to make it pop out. And you could use some smoky slate there if you wanted 2 shades of the grays coming through, because gray granite is kind of a browny gray, and your smoky slate is a gray, a light gray. So you could use either one. So I like that. We're going to go ahead and stop here. Now at this point, I will go ahead and speed up the camera a little bit. We're going to let that ink dry before we put any of the Wink Estelle on. And I'll go ahead and cut this out. So stay tuned. I'll be right back. Adhere this to the back of our circle, or front of our circle. I'm going inside so my stitches still show there. Okay, and then for our little banner that we're going to do, we'll cut one end of it. We'll just go kind of in the center here, and then cut up into the center so we get them as even as possible. They don't have to be exact. Okay, so then I'll dry fit this just real quick to make sure that I get it where I want to, and I will be putting this also on a dimension. So let's bring it here, and then I want this about right there because I want some of the mushrooms from the paper to show. So I like the way that looks, so let's go ahead and put this down now. Okay, there they are. And let's go ahead and get us another couple of dimensions here and put on the back. And there's a couple of ways you can do this. You can either bring this up underneath like I just did with this. I'm going to bring it kind of into those others. I'm mainly wanting to make sure that I don't go over the edge of my card, so I'm able to maneuver it around a little bit. So let's go ahead. I think this is a good spot for that. And then for this piece here, you can also put a small dimension on this side just to kind of balance the depth of it and give it some texture, which we get with the dots. Looks great, right? Okay, so let's go ahead and come in here and finish it off. I'm going to trim up this frame a little bit, like I said I was going to do, because I got a little bit too long. I think I was measuring at 5.5 instead of 5.25 when I did it, so I think this will bring the frame where we need it to be. Not quite. Let's trim it just a little bit more. And I do apologize. I hopefully speed this up through there. Okay. All right, so that looks good. And what I'm trying to do is, because I want to keep this, see, there's wanting to separate, but I want to try and keep this together. So what I'm going to do is pull out my silicone, and while I have it together and lined up, I'm going to put my adhesive on both pieces and then flop it over, and hopefully they'll stay lined. And okay, there we go, and there's our finished card. Here's the first one that I showed you, and this is the one we just finished today. All right, thank you and have a blessed day, and be sure and come back. And if you like the video, make sure that you hit a subscribe.